year of the Newburyport Literary Festival. This is a volunteer-run event. It's free to everyone. We're also happy to take donations. And the theme this year is the importance of being a reader, and I suspect everyone in this room is a reader. Right, today I'd like to welcome our author and moderator. The topic is on friendship and freedom. Marjan Kamali in conversation with Jenna Bloom. And Marjan is returning to the festival to discuss her epic new novel, The Lion Women of Tehran. With New York Times bestselling author Jenna Bloom. The novel is set against 3 transformative decades in the Iranian capital, and it's a powerful and timely exploration of the way women's friendships and freedoms can shift over time. In this moment, when women's roles are once again being redefined, this is a book and discussion we need more than ever. So a little background information. Marjan is the award-winning author of The Lion Women of Tehran, an instant national bestseller, The Stationery Shop, a national and international bestseller, and Together Tea, a Massachusetts Book Award finalist. She is a 2022 recipient of the National Endowment for the Arts Creative Writing Fellowship. Her novels have been published in translation in more than 25 languages. Her essays have appeared in the Wall Street Journal, Literary Hub, and the Los Angeles Review of Books. She holds a bachelor's degree in English literature from the University of California in Berkeley, a master's of business administration from Columbia University, and a master's of fine arts in creative writing from New York University. She was born in Turkey to Iranian parents. She spent her childhood in Turkey, Iran, Germany, Kenya, and the US. She's currently the Franny Hurst Writer-in-Residence at Brandeis University and lives in the Boston area with her family. And Jenna Bloom is the New York Times and internationally best-selling author of novels Those Who Save Us, The Storm Chasers, The Lost Family, memoir Woodrow on the Bench, World War II original podcast, The Key of Love, and audio course, The Author at Work, The Art of Writing Fiction. She's one of Oprah's top 30 women authors and CEO, co-founder of online author interview startup, A Mighty Blaze. She's a professional teacher and speaker, traveling nationally and internationally to talk about writing and books. She's based in Boston, where she has taught fiction and marketing workshops for Boston University, Grub Street Writers, A Mighty Blaze, and other institutions for over 20 years. You can visit her at jennabloom.com and follow her on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, Substack, and TikTok. Please welcome our authors.
Thank you so much. Thanks for clapping when we haven't done anything yet. We love this. I don't know if you have the same feeling, but when I hear my own bio, I'm like, who is that? Sounds really good. I know, right? Who are these people? It must be really fantastic. Thank you to the festival for doing this for 20 years. 20 years of volunteers, 20 years of readers coming out in the rain, on a baseball cap kind of day, to hear writers talk about their work when we are sitting, or when I am sitting in my study in my yoga pants playing with imaginary people. I always think what a miracle it is to then put on different pants and come out and meet real people who know my imaginary people through the magic osmosis known as reading. So we thank you very much. Readers are important indeed. Without you, we would not exist. And thank you to the Bookshop of Beverly Farms, selling our books out there. Please buy many, many, many books. It is also Independent Bookstore Day today, so throw some money at the Bookshop of Beverly Farms, at Jabberwocky, throw it at the festival, throw it at writers, throw your money around everywhere. And I'm so happy to be here with Marjan. I came to know Marjan's work through Together Tea, and then the Stationery Shop, and then I have to hold this up every time I say it, The Lion Women of Tehran. And I love this book. It made me cry on a plane. I have watched with envy as some of my colleagues have interviewed her at various venues since The Lion Women of Tehran came out. And now I'm like, it's my turn to ask the questions. So I'm delighted to be here with you today, my friend.
Thank you, Jenna. I'm so happy to be here with you. I'm happy to be in this beautiful, beautiful church with all of you. Thank you for coming out on this rainy, rainy New England day. I must say, the book we're discussing is called The Lion Women of Tehran, but ever since I stepped foot in Newburyport yesterday, I have met so many organizers, volunteers for this festival. So it really is all about the Lion Women of Newburyport Literary Festival. And the men, and who are also very much involved. I appreciate you all so much. Thank you for making this happen.
Totally agree with that. I have so many questions about how one becomes a Lion Woman with the courage that that necessitates, including the courage to put on a festival in the rain. But first, I will ask you, for the two people in here who may not have read this book yet, can you tell us what Lion Women of Tehran is about?
Sure, yes. So this book is a friendship story. It's about two girls who meet when they're 7 years old. They come from very different stations in life, but they form a fast friendship. And we see them go through the joys of childhood, of girlhood. I really wanted to capture girlhood because I think it's very fleeting, both on the page and in real life. We see them go through the ups and downs of adolescence. They go off to university together, and then an inadvertent betrayal ruptures their friendship. But don't worry, because decades later they reconnect in America. That seems to be the theme of all of my books. Like, there's a rupture and then there's a healing. The backdrop of this book is the women's rights movement in Iran. So the book takes place over the 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, early 80s, and then another time period that's a bit of a spoiler. And one of the two friends, Homa, is a tireless women's rights activist.
That's a beautiful summary. Can you tell us, this is my favorite question as a writer, what was the genesis of the book? Did it come to you through character, through story, through sort of snapshot, mental snapshot?
Yeah, this is where it gets a little tricky because I was writing another book before this book evolved. So after The Stationery Shop, my second book came out, I started to write another book, and it was about these four mothers in suburban Massachusetts whose firstborns were applying to college, and they were like uber competitive and neurotic. I used my imagination. And then it was slowly turning into a murder mystery. I had written over 100 pages, and then the pandemic began, and it was that weird, anxious time of uncertainty, like 2 weeks to slow the spread, and I was on Instagram. And when I was on Instagram, I saw these posts from a friend of mine who had been my childhood friend in Iran, and she and I had been best friends for like a year and a half. We had done everything together. We played together, we did our homework together, we shared our dreams, and then of course life took us in different directions. And when I saw her posts, I remember having like this visceral reaction, like I could remember the friendship. I could feel the texture of it. And I knew that even if the friendship hadn't lasted, her influence on me had. So I knew what I really wanted to write was the story of a broken friendship, and I had to take a deep breath and put those moms away. And then I started to write The Lion Women of Tehran.
Love it. And one of the women in the book is based on one of the moms. She was the front runner.
Oh, so here's this thing. So the moms in that other book, to chat and catch up and gossip, they would go to a cafe in Lexington, Massachusetts. And the cafe was called Miss Ellie's Cafe, and there was an elderly Iranian woman in the cafe. I plucked her out. She became the main character. So now it's all about her and her friend, Homa.
You have to watch The Quiet Ones.
Yes.
In the cafes. I love that. Back.
You know what? Did not delete them, so they live on in my laptop, and maybe one day they'll make a comeback. Maybe.
They will let you know in the middle of the night
Yes.
that they want to come out.
They'll make themselves heard, yes.
Exactly, like Miss Ellie. I love this. So thank you for telling us the genesis of the book. So the two women that we're following are Ellie and Homa, and I'm pronouncing Homa's name correctly, right?
Yes.
Ellie, this is how I characterized her in my mind, is every woman in some ways, she's more traditional in her thinking and her behavior than Homa, and Homa is the tireless activist. She's super fiery, she's bubbly, she's funny. I mean, it's really lovely to see these two women come together. I've been thinking, and I'm sure everybody here, like how many of you have these long-term friends who you've known since you were kids? Raise your hands. I hope you're here with all of them right now, but if you're not, go home and text them or call them. I love the fact that these friendships sustain us throughout our lives. I actually wrote to my college friends this morning and said, to you who remember me when I was young and rubbery and in my 20s, I was like, just send me one embarrassing anecdote that I have probably forgotten and you probably remember. And my friend Sharon said, I remember you smoking up in the college deli for 3 days straight writing your senior thesis. And I'm like, yeah, I kind of remember that. But I love these people because they are dear people to me and because they remember me when I was younger and they still see me that way, I think. When I see them every summer, I'm like, I remember when you were dating that guy on the lacrosse team or when you could bend your leg behind your head doing yoga. And so we see all these shades of each other. I'm going to read a little section from the book when Ellie and Homa have been separated for a bit. Ellie says, this is what I have missed. I missed her company, her viewpoint, her random thoughts and musings, her mind. And I thought, that sounds like love to me. Because when you love somebody, you just want to be around them to see how they process the world. And so my theory is some of the most durable loves of our lives are the women in our lives. And I'm wondering, you lost touch with your childhood friend who you saw on Instagram. Do you have somebody like this in your life who you've sort of carried with you from place to place, chapter to chapter?
You know, I think because my family moved around so much, Deborah mentioned in the intro, I've lived in 7 countries across 5 continents, and when I kept moving as a child, that was the one thing that I missed the most, the ability to sustain my friendships, because this was before Instagram and before the internet. It was harder to keep in touch. So I would say I have these amazing friends from every country and every stage of my life, but I wasn't able to continuously be with them until, quite frankly, social media. So for all its evils, there is that silver lining that it enabled me to reconnect with my best friend from Kenya, with my best friend from Iran, and to sort of all throughout these many stages of life to again have this connection with them. But I would say in my adult life, I do have friends like that, and friends in high school, from high school and college. And that's the beauty, is that sometimes I miss who I used to be, especially in middle age, as changes occur. For the younger people, I don't want to frighten anybody. But sometimes I'm like, I miss who I used to be. And when you reconnect with a friend who knew you when, they know who you used to be, and in a way, like they help it stay alive, and they remind you of who you used to be. So it's always interesting for me to see my own mom with her friends, because I see her in an entirely different light. Her laughter is different, her mannerisms are different, and suddenly I can glimpse that young university student that I never had the privilege of meeting. And so that's the beauty of these friendships. And I love what you said about Ellie. What she loves about Homa most of all is Homa's mind. And Homa can see something very mundane, very trivial, but sort of have an insight about it that makes Ellie think about something mundane and trivial in such a different way. And that's what she loves. It's not that friends make the world a better place. They don't. They just help us navigate the world as it is with a little bit more ease and a little bit more sweetness.
I love that, and I think our personalities stay consistent, whereas other things may shift during flight a little bit. So I think that's right, that even though there are, 3 people in the world who remember me with like cowcatcher bangs, they still were like, oh, you were always the one who was going to stay up all night and do this, or you were always the one who was like, don't bother me, I'm writing. And that gives you a great sense of consistency in a shifting world. So Ellie and Homa are very different, and you wrote them both in the first person. They both have points of view in the book. I love to spill the writer tea about this. Did you write all Ellie first and then Homa? Did you write them as they appeared to us? Who came to you first and how?
Oh yeah, okay, time for the real tea. So the book was written entirely from Ellie's point of view for most of the process, up until I was 3/4 through the draft. And then I knew something was missing, and you know those commercials with Captain Obvious? My husband can tell you I am Captain Obvious. Like, I kept going on walks, and I was like, something's missing. I just don't know what it is, but something's missing. And I go on these long, dramatic walks. My daughter calls them main character walks. Where I was the main character thinking, what is going on with this novel? And then it was the most obvious answer on earth. Of course I needed Homa's point of view. But I was resisting doing that. I was avoiding adding her point of view because I was afraid. I was afraid because both Ellie and Homa are born in the same year. They're born in 1943. And they're both from Iran, and they're both from a certain generation. And I foolishly thought that if I did both points of view in the first person, that they would sound too alike. But I was underestimating not my own skills, but the characters. Because finally, when it came to me in this very obvious moment, of course I need Homa's POV, and then I sat down to write her. Of course she was different, because she wrote herself, because Homa would. And those of you who've read the book, you know Homa's personality. She wrote herself, and she sounded like herself. So those worries were unfounded, but it came later in the process that I added her voice.
Do you think you have to earn those Captain Obvious moments? I love them so much, but they only come to me after 3 or 4 drafts when I've been beating my head against the wall. I have secondary character energy. When I go for walks, I walk the dog. He's the main character. But I do go for a lot of walks thinking, what the F is going on with this book? And then you earn that moment. Is that how you felt when Captain Obvious is like, Homa must come?
I did earn it. I did earn it because I agonized over it for so many months, and it was the most obvious answer that was eluding me. Had I consulted somebody in my life, perhaps they would have been like, oh, add other friends' POV, but I didn't do that. And I think sometimes subconsciously, maybe it's deliberate, because we want to earn it. We want to have that satisfaction of the Captain Obvious moment. Because even when I watch movies or read books, even though I'm a writer, I always miss the reveal, perhaps intentionally, and then when it happens, I'm like, oh, wow! So I think perhaps I want to give myself that moment.
We have these reveals in our own work which feel amazing. You are all either thinking writing is hard or y'all are crazy at this point, which, both of those things are true. Yeah, both are true, exactly. Did you consider, because they are both first person, I know Homa kind of strode onto the page, wrote herself, nobody here is surprised, who knows Homa. Did you consider third person for this book? Did Ellie, when she first came to you, present herself as her own independent voice?
She did, and it was a challenge I set out for myself because The Lion Women of Tehran is my 3rd book, and my other 2 books, Together Tea and The Stationery Shop, are both written in the close 3rd. and I've done multiple points of view in the close third. So the challenge I set out for myself with this novel was I'm going to write in the first person. So I sort of made that one of my goals. So Ellie was always in the first person. And Ellie has so many insecurities. She's easy to write in that way. Yeah.
Did you love it? Will you ever go back to third person?
I will go back. I loved first as well, but there's certain limitations in first person, and I think now that I've done it though, I've developed that muscle, so if I do it again, it'll be easier. Yeah.
I love the characters who come in and surprise you with a first-person voice. I had one of those on my recent book, and she just kind of strode in and took over, and it's like, thanks, I'll just sit here and eat popcorn. That's fine with me. So we have talked a little bit about Ellie and Homa being different, and Ellie being more traditional. She does have her insecurities, which I love about her because no writer has insecurities. No woman has insecurities. It made her very accessible, and I loved Homa's courage and her fieriness. Do you feel, I kept thinking while I was reading, do you feel more like an Ellie or a Homa or both?
So here's the truth. I'm a little bit of both. I'm a little bit Ellie, I'm a little bit Homa, a little bit country, a little bit rock. I think when I started the book, I thought I was more like Ellie. I thought I had those, which I do, I have those insecurities. One of Ellie's biggest flaws is that she's very jealous. And as she grows up, she becomes self-aware. She knows she's jealous. She hates being jealous, but she is jealous. It's her trait. So as I started the book, I thought, well, I'm more like Ellie. And perhaps that's also why I was too scared to write Homa. Maybe I didn't think I had the authority to write that strong, that courageous. But then as the book evolved, certain things happened in my life and in the real world that forced the Homa out of me. And because I saw that side of myself more and more, I'm having a lovely epiphany as we speak. Perhaps that's why I was allowed to write the Homa POV. I never thought of it that way. Thank you, Jenna. But I'm a little bit of both, and I think most women have both in them, even though we've been conditioned to think that we're more like Ellie and to suppress and repress that fierce side, especially as we grow up.
So we're taught to be nice and play nice and look nice.
Please everybody.
Please everybody. And Homa says throughout the book, especially when the political situation places her in a crucible, Iran, she says, I am so angry. Like she is enraged, and the rage acts like a furnace. For her, is this kind of what you're talking about, that the character allowed you to get in touch with?
Yes. So after this book was published, I was at a wedding of a dear friend's daughter, and one of the people at the table leaned over, and he just very politely was making small talk and said, oh, what made you write your book? And I looked at him, I was holding a glass of wine, and I said, rage. And it's the God's honest truth. It was pure rage that fueled me so many days because of what was happening in the world. And those of you who've read this novel, you know that the end of it was informed by some real life events. Things that happened in Iran that had rage coursing through my veins, that had rage propel me to finish. And it was rage mixed with a deep sadness, really, a deep sadness to think, this is what we've done. This is what we've taken away. I'll be more specific, from women who had these rights, who grew up with these rights, who felt they were safe, and then had those rights taken away from them, such that a woman who is age 60 or above in Iran today grew up with all these rights that her daughters and granddaughters cannot have. And that's a bitter pill to swallow. And as I saw events unfold, on the screen, you know, on the TV, on Instagram, on Twitter, I just remember thinking, this is so unjust, but this is our world. And how do you channel that rage? Well, one way to channel it is through art and to try and create beauty out of pain and out of rage.
Are writers lucky in that way?
We are blessed in that way. It's a privilege to have the outlet, and it became so clear to me during the pandemic because I watched people I love, people very close to me, go through deep mental health crises, and I watched as our country and the world crumbled because people didn't have access to socializing, they didn't have access to the simple freedom of going out to a restaurant. But what I had was an outlet. I had the writing. I wrote this book during the pandemic for the most part. So yes, we're very lucky to have that, supremely lucky.
I remember the early days of the pandemic posting, like, now the rest of you know what it's like to dress as a writer. Like, you never leave the house, wear the same pants for like 2 weeks at a time. And we're all playing with imaginary two-dimensional people now. Welcome to my world. Are you able to still do this now with everything, the political tumult in our own country, the sort of unprecedented, I would say, political situation that we have? Does it continue to fuel what you're working on, or does it sometimes interfere and you have to put brakes on social, on the news, etc.?
Yeah, I do put brakes on. I think when we put pressure on ourselves to write every day, then we set up this false goal because it's very easy to not meet that goal. And then it's very easy for a writer to think, oh, well, then I'm failing. I'm not writing every day. I'm not writing continuously. I'm not writing in a routine. So I've taken those pressures off. And sometimes the world is too much with us. Who said that? Matthew Arnold? I have to go back to my English lit days. The world is too much with us, and that's okay to take a break and put the brakes on, as you say. But to remember, too, that it would be a real shame to not work on your art. It would be a real shame because it's not just for you that you do it. It's for the community, right? It's for all of us. We all benefit from one another's work.
It seems like a tall order sometimes to synthesize what's happening in the world and fuel it into your work, and then at other times it's like you stick your hand in a socket and you can't stop writing it. And I felt that energy from Ellie and from Homa. And I'm wondering, I thought so much about the parallels between real life and activism. Those of you who are so privileged to follow me on my 8,000 platforms know that I am an activist. And I was thinking, reading this, would I be brave enough to be Homa? Ellie is brave in her own way. She navigates the world as she can and makes a good life for herself and really is brave in her own ways, but they're quieter than Homa. Like, Homa's out in the streets. She gets thrown in jail. This is not a spoiler. If you're writing a story about an activist, they go to jail at some point. So I'm reading this, and I think, as I do now when I go out to protest, would I survive in jail? Would I survive torture? I mean, I am a person who now needs, like, a special sleep mask just to get through the night. I am of a certain age, like, where's my mattress? You know, I'm gluten-free. Like, are they gonna give me gluten-free meals at CCOT? Probably not. So I think about this, but, like, seriously, like, my brother wrote to me and said, stop marching around out there. Like, think about the consequences of what you're doing. And my instant reaction is, I will not. But I wonder this about Homa and where she gets the courage to do this. And I am so curious about your answer to that.
So I think with a person like Homa and a person like you, I think it's innate. I think people like Homa are born that way. She cannot see an injustice and not try to address it. She can't stay home, and she doesn't stay home. And until the very bitter end she is, I feel like that's a spoiler, so I'm not going to say anything else. But, you know, the Homas of the world are the reason things aren't worse in Iran. The Homas of that country are the reason Iran isn't Afghanistan. You know what I'm saying as far as women's rights? We need them. But that doesn't mean we all have to be them, because we're all not made that way. And the Ellies of the world play a role too. The people who keep the home fires burning, the people who don't go out into the streets, but do a lot at home that helps the next generation, who maintain a sense of stability, a sense of comfort. So we're not all going to be homas. But one thing, you know, when I hear you talk, Jenna, about your own activism, one thing that I find deeply heartbreaking is that when I was writing this book, I was writing about Iran, and I was writing about things that happened there, and I was writing about this country on the other side of the world where these terrible things often happen. And for my readers in the US who grew up here, I wanted it to be revelatory. I didn't want it to be relatable. But as we proceed, and as I go on book tour, sadly, it's becoming more and more relatable. You know, I don't want it to be for you relatable. I want you to think, oh my goodness, how could this ever occur? And now it's more like, how am I going to do in the prison, you know? Is the mattress going to work for me? Like, we're all thinking in a different way right now. And that's just a hard truth, and it's a hard truth to bear, but it's one I'm witnessing.
What do you say to people who are scared?
I say it's normal to be scared, and I also say that making you feel scared is one of the basic tenets of any autocracy. So I'm not saying by any means that we are in the US where we are in Iran. Please don't misunderstand me. But I am saying that no country is immune from anything. Anything can happen anywhere, right? And in 1978, if you asked the women of Iran if they would lose their rights, they would have laughed in your face. They would have said, us? Look at us. Look at this country and the region it's in. We're the most progressive. We're the most westernized. We are the ones who have the most rights out of our neighborhood. And then when you ask them 2 years later, after those rights were taken away, they were in shock, in absolute shock. No one thought it could happen there, but it did.
And what do you say to the Ellies who are not out in the street marching around? Sometimes when I'm about to go out, I post on social and people say, can you please march for me? Like, I have a t-shirt I put people's names on, so if you want your name on my t-shirt, I'll happily do that. But people can't get out always. They're far away, they're not mobile, it is scary, you don't know what will happen. And so I always tell them you can protest in your own way, but I'm curious about what Ellie would have to say about that.
Look, it took Ellie a lifetime to realize that she wasn't Homa, and she never could be. She admired women like Homa, she admired her friend, she was envious of her friend, because she's got that envy going on, and she longed to be that way, but she just wasn't. And then as she evolved, and her arc is her coming to terms with who she is and accepting it, and to say, look, I'm never going to be in the streets. It's not me, but I applaud you who are, and I'll do what I can do from home. And some of that is maintaining your own equilibrium. That's a big accomplishment sometimes in certain circumstances. To be able to maintain and regulate your own equilibrium can be your win for the day. And I think one thing Ellie learns is she's never ever going to be a true activist like Homa, but she sure can cook a good meal. And she can nurture the ones she loves. And she is a very good wife. And she ends up being a very good mother, unexpectedly so. And I don't want to discount how extraordinary it can be to live an ordinary life. To live an ordinary life requires an immense amount of bravery. And sometimes the homeless get all the credit, because we see them marching, there they are in the street, they're so brave. But to live an ordinary life, that also requires courage.
Maybe the homeless are just noisier, but everybody has a voice. Everybody has a voice. And I'm so glad you said what you did about maintaining equilibrium, because I'm going to read a passage from homeless point of view. Actually, how do you pronounce her daughter's name? Bahar? Bahar. Okay, thank you. Knew I would mangle this. So this is from homeless point of view. She does have a daughter, Bahar. Bahar's face lights up across from me. She swirls in the middle of the room, then grabs my hands and whirls me around and around. We are like dervishes who have discovered the secret to bliss. In that moment, we are removed from the drum of protests in the streets, the shouts that want a new regime, the problems we face. We forget all that is wrong. What if, I think to myself, as I hold tight to my daughter's hands and spin, what if it all goes right? We are mother and daughter, kindred spirits. We are a 35-year-old woman and a 14-year-old girl dancing for our lives with all of our hearts, melting into laughter, ensconced in unadulterated joy. And this really struck me, like, I'm getting teary about this. It's one of the things that made me cry on the plane. Thanks. Because I think that is what it's all about. And I do see this right now a lot on social with the influencers saying, like, just capture your joy and it's enough in the face of injustice. And I'm like, is it though? You know, just because, like, I had a bubble bath today. I'm good, we're all good, we're good, right? But then I thought, this is the example of what that really means. And this is how we maintain our equilibrium, is to find that joy in the midst of things that scare or enrage us. What is your source of joy?
Ooh. Well, the biggest source, the most consistent source throughout my entire life, other than my family and my loved ones, has been reading. Reading has saved me. You know, I'm a child of war, and one thing that people don't realize about living through a war is that when you're living through the war, you still have moments like that. You still can hold, if there's no pandemic, you still can be with your loved ones and hold their hands and maybe dance to a silly song, and for those few minutes escape everything. But the thing that has carried me throughout my life and given me solace and company and understanding and groundedness has been reading. Since the day I could read, I've been reading. I don't want to imagine a life without it. Sometimes I start to like panic and I say, what if I lose my eyesight? And then I'm like, okay, audiobooks. What if I lose my hearing? And then, I don't know, somebody will create something by then, I hope, like a chip to put in my brain. But yeah, reading gives me joy, cooking gives me joy, food, eating gives me joy. Very simple things. It's not anything, it's not like parachuting or rock climbing or, you know, it's very, very simple pleasures. A good cup of coffee gives me joy. Yeah. And you know, I'll be vain. I like stuff about my hair. If things are going okay, that gives me joy.
So you're happy today, I'm taking it. Look at the hair, the hair. Even on this rainy day, look at her.
All right, thanks, Jenna.
I agree, I think joy is often very simple. And I'm glad I'm not the only person who geeks out. Like, I go outside and I'm like, look at that tree! And my neighbors are like, oh God, her again. I will say also, Proust said that patriotism is the recollection of food served in childhood. And this book also made me hungry on a plane, thank you, where I was like, can I have more of those peanuts and pop chips, please? But the food in the Lion Women of Tehran is magnificent. Can you talk a little bit about the Iranian food? Do you cook it? Do you eat it? Did you bring us some?
I cook it, I eat it. I didn't bring you some, but you should come over one day. I will make it for you. Yeah, you might think I'm just saying that, but it's part of the Persian culture to like just invite total strangers into the home and then cook a feast. And in Boston, those of you who've been to like the Boston book events, my husband brings food. There's food. So here's the thing. We know a lot about cuisines from that region, but what sets aside Persian food is that it's not hot or spicy. It's not, how do I put this? The flavor profile, there's a lot of tartness and sweetness. So there's a lot of fruit and herbs in the food. And oh gosh, I just love the food so much. I want to talk to you a lot about the food, but I don't want to derail us. But look, food is comfort, isn't it? And it's also a connection to our past. And I also think preparing food and sharing it with the people that we care about is deeply grounding and deeply nurturing and healing. And so that's the other thing that I've noticed is when I feel really sad or disconnected, I cook. And it's very much like writing, because you start off with nothing and then you create something. And yes, Newburyport, I don't know if you guys have Iranian restaurants, but there are many in Boston. I link to recipes on my website. And if you follow me on Instagram, you know that half of what I post about is food. So
I'm so hungry right now, actually, listening to her talk about this. What is your favorite comfort food, your favorite Iranian comfort food?
it's what we call tahdig, which is the bottom of the pot, crispy. It's like not quite burned, but the golden crust of rice when it's cooked too much. And it's really crispy and golden and delicious. And I can't recommend it highly enough. I wish I'd brought platters of it so you could taste it.
I wish so too. Sincerely. I had this once in LA at an Iranian restaurant, and it was like a delicious oil-soaked, salty, rice, crunchy thing. And so when I got home, I'm like, I can make this. I am Norwegian German. I made a burnt pot. And I was still trying to scrape the rice off the bottom of the pot. So I'm like, surely this still must taste like
Yeah, we need to talk. So I have so many friends who try it and they mess it up. And I'm just gonna, here at the Newburyport Literary Festival, I'm gonna say 3 words: Persian rice cooker. You just order that and it does it for you. And then you don't have to worry. It's automatic. It's Persian rice cooker.
That was worth the price of admission right there, people. Who is going to go home and order a Persian rice cooker? I am. That's pretty much all I'm going to eat from now on. Do you have questions for Marjan? I will happily repeat them if you ask them.
I have like a nerdy writer question. So you said the limitations from first person to third person. Can you just clarify what those limitations are in your mind?
So the question was about the limitations of first person to third person. So here's the thing, when you're writing in third person, even if you're writing in close third, you might think to yourself as a writer, well, in close third, I'm limited to that character's point of view, I'm limited to their lens, I'm limited to their world, so then why would first person be even more limiting? Well, first person is more limiting because when you write in first person, it's so much about the voice and that character's opinion and that character's syntax and their individuality in the way they speak. So it's like a heavier burden, right? Whereas if you're just doing close third, yes, you're limited to how, let's say, Jenna sees this room, and you're limited to everything from Jenna's point of view, but you don't have to say it the way Jenna would say it. That's the difference. And if I'm writing first person for Jenna, then I have to write the way Jenna would speak. So that's something that you then have to carry throughout the novel, you see. That's one of the main differences.
That would be such a joy, by the way, I'm sure.
Yes, it would. I feel like I could do that.
I sense a dare. Do you have other questions yet? When was the last time you were in Iran?
Yeah, so I should clarify that. I didn't really grow up there, so I write about it so much that people think I grew up there, but I only lived in Iran between ages of 2 and 5, and then again 9 to 10 and a half. But that second segment was right after the revolution. It was the start of the war. It was a very pivotal time in my life and in Iran's history. I left when I was 10, and then I didn't go back until my 20s. I went twice in my 20s, twice in my 30s, and I haven't been back since. So the last time I was there was in 2011.
Hi. You have such a great sense of humor. How do you bring that into your stories and your different characters?
Thank you for saying that. You know, my late dad, had a great sense of humor, and I think it's my biggest pride that when I meet his friends, they say, "Oh my God, you got his sense of humor." It's like, you can't say anything better to me than that. In the book, how does it come out? Well, you know what? Like my first book, it's about a mother-daughter. It's about immigrants who come to the U.S. The backdrop is revolution and war, and it's funny. It's a comedy of manners. In any situation, there is humor. Because people think we live in a sad world, or some people think we live in a lovely world. I think we live in an absurd world. I really do. I think the one adjective is absurd. And sometimes as writers, we pick up on the absurdities, and we can kind of hone in on that.
You're giving the volunteers a literal run for their money today. Thank you.
Could you talk a little bit about Ellie's relationship with her mom and the evolution of it?
Yes, we must talk about this. We must talk about this because also I feel like I should be required by law to tell you that Ellie's mother is not my mother. My mother would like you to know that she is not Ellie's mother, because sometimes people call her and they're like, "Are you?" And she's like, "I'm not." Ellie's mother is not my mother, but Ellie's mother is a piece of work. She is a narcissist, and she is a deeply self-absorbed parent, and I really wanted to write what it must be like to be the child of a narcissist, because the thing with narcissists is, and I've studied this a lot, I've studied it so much that now I get like a Quora digest about narcissism all the time in my email, like, because they spy on whatever you Google. But, you know, Ellie's mother thinks she's doing what's best for Ellie. She believes she's doing what's best for Ellie. She has, like many parents, the best of intentions. But that doesn't mean that that is what's best for Ellie. I grew up with the book in that I started off writing Ellie's mother as this stereotypical narcissist, and truth be told, I finished the first draft with her remaining so, and it wasn't until my editor read the book and she said to me, "So when are we going to redeem the mom?" And I said, "Are we going to redeem the mom?" And she said, "I think you should. Yeah, write a scene redeeming her." And that's like the note you get, right? So it's like, okay, here I go on another walk. How do I redeem the mom? But then I felt like I could create a balance, and by writing that scene and understanding her myself, I learned to give her grace. And I learned that every narcissist has an original wound, and every narcissist, there's a backstory to why they are the way they are. So I hope that by finishing the book, all of us, including me, can give her a bit more grace. Yeah.
Did you love that scene? I love the scene. When you wrote it.
But yeah, when I finally was able to write it, I did. It was helpful that it was at Bloomingdale.
I was just going to ask about that. I went to that restaurant with my mom. So, yeah, the Bloomingdale's basement restaurant. It was black. It had neon lighting. It was so sophisticated.
But I should have called you, because I kept doing research on what it would have looked like, but maybe you didn't go in 1982. So.
Yeah, I did, actually.
Oh my God.
I would go get my braces tightened, and then we would go to Bloomingdale's.
Serendipity.
Serendipity, yes. So I was like, oh my gosh,
Should've just
Marjan
called
has been
you.
there. And P.S. now the 80s are historical fiction.
Do you know, one of the biggest compliments, I love when people say, I love how you recreated mid-20th century Iran, I felt like I was there, and then every now and then a young person will say, I love how you recreated the 1980s, and you made it feel really real. How did you do that research? And I think to myself, wow, I miss who I used to be.
But we had good hair then.
That is my question to some degree. You lived in Iran such a short time. Were you able to speak to people who had experienced some of this? Or was it all news research or, knowing what was going on?
Honestly, the time period details and the place details were 90% from interviews of people who had lived there, because there's only so much you can learn from the research. You can research in a library, you can research online, you can read nonfiction books, but I had the privilege of speaking to elders in my family who had lived there. So for the stationery shop, I spoke so much to elders in my family and I interviewed them, and the one who helped me the most was my own father. He told me what people were wearing, the cafes, what they were ordering, the specific drinks, the specific pastries, the music they were listening to. And the Lion Women of Tehran, I interviewed my mother a lot. And Ellie and Homa attend her high school. So I was able to describe the uniforms and how they had lunch, where they went for lunch. Cafe Andre is real, the sandwiches are real, the drinks are real. There's nothing on the menu that didn't exist. I was very specific. And you know what, at the time when I was interviewing my mom, she kept saying, why do you care? No one cares. I said, no. They care, I care. Describe the ham sandwich, please. Describe it again. And she'd be like, okay, it had tomatoes, the bread. And then after the book came out, I got an email from a woman who said, I was reading this book, and imagine my surprise when I saw my grandfather's cafe described in it. And she said, my grandfather was Andre, and they immigrated to Iran from Russia. They were Armenian Russian immigrants, and they created this cafe. And she said, thank you for describing my grandparents' cafe. That was one of those moments where I just sat quietly in a chair staring at a wall. I just couldn't believe it. So yeah, those details are from the people who lived there at that time.
You talk about how many times a day you might write or don't write or whatever. How do you come up with that first sentence, that first paragraph, that first blank sheet of paper? What inspires you to do that, and how many times do you write a first sentence?
I'm curious to hear what Jenna has to say about this too, but I will tell you the first sentence of the Lion Women of Tehran, without exaggeration. Please let me say it's not the current first sentence, but what I thought was the first sentence, I fiddled with perhaps 200 times. And here's what happened. I had this prologue to the book, and every time I started my writing day, I would refine, revise, fidget, tweak that prologue. And then when I finished the book, the prologue became the epilogue. So, nothing is wasted, but I would say one thing I do that helps me move forward and not just rewrite the same sentence 100 times is I write longhand. And by writing longhand, a lot of the first draft longhand, it helps me make it less precious and less perfectionist, because part of me is like, I'm just a kid writing in my notebook that I bought from CVS, It was like $1.20, and who cares? It demystifies the process. And in the first draft, I'm one of those people that I say to myself, in fact, there is a label on that notebook that says there are no mistakes. So in the first draft, I just let it go, and then in the revision process, I go back, and then I let uber obsessive perfectionist tendencies take over. But that's the only way I can come up with the lump of clay with which to sculpt it. Yeah.
I love that. The first line now is, I stood on the lacquered floor, a small woman in black with a rectangular name badge on my chest.
Yes, I feel it's such a basic sentence, and that was not my original first sentence. But that's okay. That's okay.
It gets us into the story and
Yes.
into the character and into the place. I think it is a perfect person.
Thank you, Jenna.
You're welcome.
Hi, is your book published in Iran or can it be published there?
So of my 3 books, my second book, The Stationery Shop, has been translated into Persian and it's published in Iran. Because of the sanctions, I can't sign a contract with Iran the way I do with the other countries. And they don't adhere to international copyright law. They just take whatever books we have in English and translate them into Persian. So The Stationery Shop is sold in 2 editions there. I don't think Together Tea or The Lion Women of Tehran will be sold there because these 2 books, they're not at all regime friendly. I cannot imagine them being in Iranian bookstores unless things change. But this stationery shop is, yeah.
Hi, you've lived in many different places, and obviously your newest book concentrates in Tehran, but I'm just wondering, how would you characterize your cultural identity?
Yes, I feel like that's the kind of question, that's why I went to therapy. But now I have an answer for you. You see, that's what I grappled with my entire life because my parents were born and raised in Iran, I was not. And yet, so much of my identity from them is Iranian, and yet I lived in 7 countries. And I consider myself Iranian American. I'm a little bit country, I'm a little bit rock and roll. I'm both. Iran and America for me are very symbiotic and in many ways incredibly similar. We can get into that another day. They are the red states, blue states, liberal, conservative. They're very similar, divided. Now they're becoming more similar, which is deeply sad. But in my 20s, I came across a book called Third Culture Kids, and it changed my life because it gave a definition to people like me who were global nomads. So I'm a third culture kid, and if you don't know what it means, you should look up this book because it's so helpful to the people who've been enriched by many cultures and estranged by many cultures. But I would say that's the closest thing I am, yeah.
Hi, I assume you follow the politics of Iran. Where do you see hope?
Yeah, so, the politics of Iran, it's an endless cycle of the last 44 years of protests being squashed down. Protests being squashed down. And you see it play out in the Lion Women of Tehran. The only way to proceed is to take the long view. If you look at the past 45 years alone, it can be deeply depressing. But it's good to look at 2,500 years and to then sort of say to yourself, perhaps this is a blip in its history, and to remind ourselves that all tyrannies eventually crumble. I'm optimistic because I sort of have a Pollyanna disease, but I don't know, how long can you keep down a population that's actually quite educated and young and wants to be enmeshed with the world in a very different way and that completely regrets what their parents and grandparents did back in '79? I don't know. I don't have a good answer, but I just hope that things get better there. I don't lose hope.
I can think of no better way to end, except there's another question. So we're going to take that question and then. say something equally inspiring in answer to this question.
I was just going to ask, if Homa were in the room, what do you think she would say to this room that's filled with so many American women in this political moment? What do you think she would want to say to us?
Goodness gracious. She would be talking your ears off. She would be saying, please understand this is Homa, not me. Okay? Because I'm a little bit LA too, okay? But Homa would be saying, my friends, do not get complacent. Homa would be saying, don't think it can't happen here. That's what Homa would say. Homa would say, stay vigilant, push back, push back, push back. Don't let the problem that's another person's problem not feel like yours, because tomorrow it could be yours. Homa would say, disappearing people off the streets of the US of A is not what the US of A does. That's what Homa would say. Homa would say, push back.
Okay, that is the mic drop moment that we were waiting for. Thank you.